3 years after the military told Emily Carter her husband had died in Syria, a starving German shepherd appeared at her shelter during a deadly snowstorm. The dog was pregnant, wounded, and wearing the same military tag as her husband's missing canine partner. But when Emily scanned the unborn puppies, the screen revealed something terrifying. U.S. military property. And somewhere deep in the frozen Montana mountains, a man the world believed was dead was still waiting for someone to find him. Snowstorms rolled across the Montana mountains like slow-moving ghosts, swallowing the pine forest beneath curtains of white, while the lonely lights of Raven Creek Animal Shelter flickered against the darkness. Emily Carter had stopped believing in peaceful nights a long time ago. At 37 years old, she looked older than her age, not because of wrinkles, but because grief had settled into her face the way winter settles into abandoned towns. She was tall and slender, almost too thin from years of skipping meals to keep the shelter alive. Her chestnut-brown hair, once soft and carefully styled, was now usually tied into a loose knot that fell apart by midnight. Pale skin stretched beneath tired green eyes shadowed by exhaustion, and there was always a quiet heaviness in the way she moved, as if every step carried memories she could never put down. 3 years earlier, 2 military officers had stood on her porch holding a folded American flag and condolences that sounded rehearsed. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter, had disappeared during a classified operation in Syria alongside his military working dog, Raven, 12. Officially, both were declared dead after an explosion destroyed their convoy. No remains were ever recovered. Emily never truly believed it, but believing otherwise hurt too much, so she buried the hope instead. The shelter became the only thing keeping her alive. Raven Creek Animal Shelter sat near the edge of Black Hollow Forest, surrounded by old pine trees and forgotten logging roads. The building itself looked exhausted, much like Emily. The paint peeled from the walls, pipes rattled every winter, and half the lights only worked when they felt like it. The shelter housed 23 abandoned animals, most of them old, injured, or unwanted. Emily cared for them all herself because she could no longer afford employees. Every month was a battle against bills. Every morning began before sunrise, and every night ended with silence. That silence was the worst part. Daniel's boots still sat beside the front door exactly where he had left them before deployment. His old denim jacket remained hanging on the coat rack beside the kitchen. Sometimes Emily caught herself staring at it while making coffee, half expecting him to walk through the door with snow on his shoulders and apologize for being late. But ghosts never came home. The storm worsened near midnight. Wind slammed against the shelter windows hard enough to shake the frames. The dogs barked nervously in their kennels while thunder rolled across the mountains like distant artillery fire. Emily froze at the sound. For a brief second, Montana disappeared. She was back inside a military hospital tent in Syria, hands covered in blood while helicopters screamed overhead and wounded soldiers cried for help around her. Daniel had changed after returning from his second deployment. Quieter, more protective. The nightmares had become part of him long before the military finally took him away forever. Emily inhaled sharply and forced herself back to the present. PTSD had a cruel way of reopening old wounds without warning. A sudden beam of headlights cut through the snow outside. Emily's body stiffened instantly. Nobody visited Raven Creek at midnight during a blizzard. She grabbed the flashlight beside the desk and stepped cautiously toward the front window. A black SUV sat near the gate, engine rumbling beneath layers of snow. The driver's side door slowly opened. A man stepped out. Even through the storm, Emily recognized military posture immediately. Broad shoulders, controlled movements. The kind of awareness soldiers carried long after war ended. The stranger looked to be in his late 40s, tall and heavily built beneath a dark military jacket faded by time and weather. His beard was rough and streaked with gray, and although the hood shadowed most of his face, Emily noticed the scars along his jawline. The man moved like someone who had spent years surviving dangerous places. He never smiled, never introduced himself. Instead, he walked to the back of the SUV and opened the cargo door. Emily's breath caught. Inside lay a German shepherd. The dog was female, large but dangerously underweight, her black and tan fur soaked with melted snow and streaked with dirt. Several scars crossed her ribs and shoulders, some old, some fresh. Her belly was swollen with pregnancy, and exhaustion trembled through her body with every shallow breath she took. Yet despite her condition, the dog's amber eyes remained alert, intelligent, almost painfully human. "She needs help," the man said quietly. His voice sounded rough, like gravel dragged across concrete. Emily stepped closer carefully. "What happened to her?" The stranger ignored the question. "She knows the way home." Before Emily could respond, the man climbed back into the SUV. "Wait," she shouted. "Who are you?" But the engine roared alive. Within seconds, the black SUV disappeared into the snowstorm, swallowed by darkness as if it had never existed. Emily stood frozen for a moment beside the trembling dog. Then the German shepherd slowly lifted her head. Their eyes met, and something inside Emily's chest tightened painfully. Not fear, recognition. The dog didn't growl when Emily touched her. Instead, her exhausted body sagged slightly with relief, as though she had been searching for this exact place for a very long time. "You poor girl," Emily whispered softly. The German shepherd leaned weakly against her side. Emily wrapped a blanket around the animal and carefully guided her inside the shelter while snow spiraled through the open doorway behind them. Neither of them knew yet that before sunrise, Emily Carter's entire life was about to change forever. Morning arrived slowly over the Montana mountains, pale gray lights spilling across the frozen forests while snow continued drifting against the shelter windows. Inside Raven Creek Animal Shelter, the air smelled of wet fur, antiseptic, and burnt coffee. Emily Carter had not slept for more than an hour. The German shepherd remained curled inside the medical kennel beneath thick blankets, breathing heavily but no longer trembling from the cold. In daylight, Emily could finally study the animal properly. The dog appeared around 5 years old, large even for a shepherd, with powerful shoulders hidden beneath malnourished ribs. Her black and tan coat was scarred across the chest and hind legs, and patches of missing fur revealed burns that looked far too deliberate to be accidents. But it was the eyes that haunted Emily. Amber, intelligent, watchful. Military dogs often carried a different kind of awareness, and this one watched every movement inside the room without panic, as if constantly calculating exits, threats, and survival. Even exhausted and pregnant, she never fully relaxed. Emily knelt beside the kennel with a bowl of water. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The dog lifted her head slowly. Then her ears twitched toward the hallway. Emily turned. Daniel's old military jacket still hung near the kitchen door. The shepherd stared at it with painful intensity. A soft whine escaped her throat. Emily's chest tightened. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." Her hands shook as she reached carefully beneath the dog's neck and unclipped the damaged collar hidden beneath tangled fur. Rust covered most of the metal tag, scratched so heavily it looked intentionally destroyed. Emily carried it to the sink and gently cleaned away years of grime with an old toothbrush. At first, only fragments appeared. Then the full engraving emerged beneath the light. Raven, 12. Emily stopped breathing. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. 3 years ago, Daniel had shown her photographs of Raven during deployment. The dog had been more than military equipment to him. Raven had saved lives in Syria by detecting explosives hidden beneath roads and abandoned buildings. Daniel used to joke that the shepherd was smarter than half the soldiers in his unit. The military claimed Raven died beside him, but Raven was alive, and somehow she had found her way home. A knock at the shelter door shattered the silence. Emily quickly hid the collar inside her jacket before opening the door. Sheriff Deputy Mason Reed stood outside, holding a paper cup of coffee in one gloved hand. Mason was 42, broad-shouldered, with short sandy blonde hair and tired blue eyes that always looked slightly apologetic. Years working law enforcement in a small mountain town had carved permanent exhaustion into his face. He had known Daniel before the deployment and checked on Emily regularly ever since the funeral. "You've got tire tracks all over your driveway," Mason said carefully. "Everything okay?" Emily forced a small smile. "Someone dropped off a stray during the storm." Mason stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. "At midnight. That usually means trouble around here." Before Emily could answer, a low growl emerged from the medical room. Mason frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound like a normal stray." Emily's pulse quickened. "She's scared, that's all." The deputy approached the kennel slowly. The moment Mason saw the German shepherd, his expression changed completely. Recognition. Emily, his voice lowered. That dog. I know. Mason crouched beside the kennel carefully. Raven stared back at him without aggression, though her body remained tense. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Raven slowly lowered her head. Mason exhaled sharply. Good God. You recognize her too? She came through town once before deployment. Daniel brought her to the sheriff's department for a demonstration. Mason rubbed his jaw nervously. I'd swear on my badge that's the same dog. Emily handed him the collar silently. Mason read the tag and went pale. This is bad, he muttered. What do you mean? Military working dogs are federal property. If someone reports this, he looked back at Raven. Emily, people disappear over less than classified military assets. Before Emily could respond, Raven suddenly stood up inside the kennel, ears rigid. A deep growl rumbled from her chest. Then she began scratching frantically at the floor. Emily stepped closer. Easy, girl. Raven whined sharply and collapsed sideways. Her body tightened violently. Mason's eyes widened. She's in labor. The next hour descended into chaos. Thunder rolled outside while Emily transformed instantly into the calm precision she once carried as a military nurse. Towels covered the floor. Medical supplies scattered across counters. Raven fought through contractions silently, refusing to cry out despite obvious pain. At 4:13 a.m., the first puppy was born. Then the second. Then the third. Mason carefully wrapped each newborn in blankets while Emily monitored Raven's condition. But something felt wrong. The puppies were unusually large, their paws oversized even at birth. Dark markings stretched across their shoulders in unnatural patterns. And then Emily noticed something beneath the skin of the second puppy's neck. A tiny metallic bump. Her blood turned cold. Mason, she whispered. Get me the scanner. The deputy handed over the microchip scanner with shaking hands. Emily passed it slowly across the puppy's shoulder. The machine beeped. Text appeared on the screen. Property of U.S. military K-9 program. Emily stared at the words in horror while thunder shook the shelter walls around them. Outside, somewhere beyond the snow-covered mountains, danger had already started moving toward Raven Creek. The snowstorm finally passed by morning, but Raven Creek Animal Shelter no longer felt safe. Silence hung over the mountains like something waiting to strike, and Emily Carter could feel it in her bones. The 4 newborn puppies slept beneath heat lamps inside the medical room, pressed tightly against Raven's chest. The German Shepherd had not left their side once. Exhaustion dragged at her body, yet every sound outside still made her ears twitch sharply. Military instinct. Hypervigilance. Trauma. Emily recognized all of it because she carried the same scars inside herself. Sheriff Deputy Mason Reed stood near the window holding the chip scanner in one hand, staring at the words still glowing on the screen. Property of U.S. military K-9 program. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Puppies aren't implanted this early. Emily folded her arms tightly across her chest. Then someone implanted them before they were born. The sentence sounded insane even to her. Mason looked toward Raven. Emily, if this is connected to some classified military operation, you need to report it. And tell them what? Her voice sharpened instantly. That the dog they claimed died with my husband suddenly appeared pregnant on my doorstep? Mason had no answer. Neither of them noticed Raven rise slowly to her feet. The shepherd walked toward the back exit of the shelter and stopped there, staring west toward the mountains. Her entire posture changed. Focused. Alert. Waiting. Then she growled. Not fear. Recognition. A vehicle approached outside. Mason instinctively reached for his sidearm, while Emily moved cautiously toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, she saw an old dark green pickup truck pulling into the driveway. The driver stepped out slowly. He looked dangerous before he even spoke. The man was tall, lean, and deeply weathered by hard years. Late 40s maybe, though suffering had aged him beyond certainty. Dark hair streaked with gray fell around a rough, angular face covered by uneven stubble. A long scar crossed the bridge of his nose and disappeared beneath his beard. His brown leather jacket looked worn from years outdoors, and his cold gray eyes carried the hollow distance Emily had only ever seen in combat veterans. But it wasn't the scars that unsettled her most. It was the exhaustion, the kind that came from surviving too long. The stranger raised both hands calmly when Mason stepped outside with his weapon drawn. My name is Ryan Mercer, he said quietly. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Mason kept the gun aimed directly at his chest. Then explain why a military dog connected to a dead soldier just showed up here carrying classified puppies. Ryan's gaze shifted toward the shelter window, toward Raven. For the first time since arriving, emotion cracked through his hardened expression. She made it home, he whispered. Emily stepped forward. You know her? Ryan nodded slowly. I trained beside Raven in Syria. Silence swallowed the snowy yard. Emily's heart hammered painfully inside her chest. What happened to Daniel? She asked. Ryan looked at her for a long moment before answering. The military lied to you. The world seemed to stop breathing. Mason lowered the gun slightly. Careful. Ryan ignored him. Daniel Carter never died in Syria. Emily stared at him blankly. No, she whispered immediately. No, don't do that to me. Ryan's jaw tightened painfully, like the words physically hurt him to say. Your husband was captured during the convoy attack. Him and Raven both. The explosion was real, but Daniel survived. Emily backed away slowly. That's impossible. I wish it was. Ryan removed a folded photograph from inside his jacket and handed it toward her. Emily's fingers trembled as she took it. The photo showed Daniel. Older, thinner, beard covering half his face. Bruises dark beneath exhausted eyes. But alive. Very alive. Emily nearly collapsed. He's being held by a trafficking network operating across the Canadian border, Ryan continued quietly. Military dogs, tactical breeding programs, private buyers. They sell trained combat dogs to mercenaries and criminal organizations for millions. Mason swore under his breath. Ryan pointed toward the puppies inside the shelter. Those pups are worth more than gold to the people hunting them. Emily could barely hear him anymore. All she could see was Daniel's face in the photograph. Alive. For 3 years, she had mourned him. For 3 years, she had slept beside ghosts while somewhere beyond those mountains her husband suffered alone. Why now? She asked weakly. Why send Raven here? Ryan looked toward the shelter again. Because Daniel knew she'd find her way home. His voice softened. And because Raven escaped. At the sound of her name, the German shepherd suddenly appeared behind the glass door. Her amber eyes locked onto Ryan instantly. Not hostile. Recognizing. Ryan's face tightened with grief. She was his last hope. Emily opened the door slowly. Raven walked directly toward Ryan and stopped inches away from him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the shepherd pressed her head gently against his hand. A broken smile crossed Ryan's scarred face. She remembers. Mason stepped closer. If what you're saying is true, the FBI will already be looking for those dogs. Ryan nodded once. And the men who took Daniel will kill everyone in this shelter to get them back. The wind howled through the trees outside. Emily looked down at the photograph again. Daniel alive, waiting somewhere in the darkness. Fear still lived inside her. But something stronger was beginning to wake beside it. Hope. And hope was dangerous. Emily slowly lifted her eyes toward Ryan. Take me to him. Night swallowed the Montana wilderness as Emily Carter followed Ryan Mercer deep into Black Hollow Forest, where old logging roads twisted through the mountains like scars forgotten by time. Snow still covered the ground in pale silver beneath the moonlight, and every breath burned cold inside Emily's lungs. Nova moved silently ahead of them. The German shepherd no longer looked like a frightened, abandoned animal. Her body language had transformed completely the deeper they traveled into the forest. Despite the exhaustion of childbirth only 2 days earlier, instinct seemed to pull her forward with relentless focus. Her ears remained upright, muscles tense beneath thick fur, amber eyes scanning the darkness with military precision. She knew where they were going. Ryan carried an old tactical rifle across his shoulder while leading them down a narrow ridge overlooking the valley below. In the dim moonlight, Emily studied him more carefully than before. Ryan Mercer looked like a man stitched together from war and regret. Every movement carried old injuries. His left leg dragged slightly from what was likely an untreated fracture years ago. The scar across his nose was only one of many hidden beneath his clothes. But the deepest wound lived in his eyes. Guilt. The kind men carried after surviving when others did not. You should have stayed behind, Ryan muttered quietly without looking at her. Emily tightened her grip on the handgun Mason had given her before they left. Daniel is my husband. Ryan nodded once. That's exactly why this place scares me. They reached the ridge shortly before midnight. Emily's stomach dropped. Below them sat an old abandoned lumber facility, surrounded by fencing and floodlights powered by portable generators. Armed men patrolled the perimeter while black SUVs stood parked beside warehouse buildings. Even from a distance, Emily could hear dogs barking somewhere inside the compound. Dozens of them. Some frantic, some aggressive, some sounding terrified. Ryan crouched low beside a fallen tree and pointed toward the largest warehouse. That's where they keep the dogs. And Daniel? Office building on the east side. Ryan's voice hardened. Victor Krause runs everything from there. Emily frowned. Victor? Ryan's jaw tightened visibly. Former military contractor. Discharged after illegal operations overseas. Smart. Ruthless. The kind of man who learned war makes more money when peace never comes. Nova suddenly froze beside them. Her ears locked forward. Then she let out the lowest growl Emily had heard yet. Someone was coming. Ryan pulled Emily down just as flashlights swept across the trees below. Two armed guards moved along the fence line, speaking Russian to each other. One carried a shotgun, while the other held a leash attached to a Belgian Malinois, trained for combat patrols. The patrol dog suddenly stopped. Its nose lifted toward the wind. Toward Nova. Emily's pulse exploded. The Malinois barked violently. Move, Ryan hissed. Gunfire erupted instantly. Bullets tore through the trees as Ryan shoved Emily downhill toward the compound. Nova sprinted beside them through the darkness while alarms exploded across the facility below. So much for stealth. Ryan fired twice, dropping one of the guards before dragging Emily behind a rusted truck near the warehouse entrance. Sirens screamed through the compound while floodlights swept wildly across the snow. You okay? He shouted. Emily nodded breathlessly. Fear shook through her body, but underneath it something colder had awakened. The same survival instinct she once carried as a military nurse working under mortar fire. Nova suddenly bolted away from them. No, Emily shouted. The shepherd charged directly toward the eastern building. Toward Daniel. 3 armed men intercepted her near the courtyard. Nova attacked without hesitation. Fast, brutal, precise. Emily watched in shock as the German shepherd moved like pure military training and fury combined. One guard fell screaming before another fired directly at Nova. The gunshot echoed through the compound. Nova collapsed hard into the snow. Nova, Emily screamed. But the shepherd struggled back onto her feet despite blood spreading across her shoulder. She kept running. Toward Daniel. Ryan grabbed Emily's arm before she could rush into gunfire. Focus. That's what she's trying to protect. Another explosion shook the compound. Dogs barked wildly inside the warehouse. Ryan looked toward the chaos and made his decision. I'll get the dogs out. Emily stared at him. Ryan. Daniel's inside. His tired gray eyes met hers calmly for the first time. Go bring your husband home. Before she could stop him, Ryan sprinted toward the warehouse. Gunfire followed immediately. Emily forced herself toward the eastern building while Nova limped ahead through the snow, leaving streaks of blood behind her. Inside the building, darkness swallowed the narrow hallways. Emily's hands trembled around the pistol as she followed Nova toward a locked metal door at the end of the corridor. The shepherd stopped there, whining softly. Emily fired twice into the lock. The door burst open. A man sat chained inside the room beneath dim yellow light. Thin, bearded, broken, but alive. Daniel Carter slowly lifted his head. For one frozen second, neither of them breathed. Emily felt her knees weaken instantly. Daniel looked older now, his once athletic frame reduced by years of starvation and abuse. Dark hair hung unevenly around a hollow face covered in scars and exhaustion. Yet his blue eyes remained unmistakable, the same eyes she had loved her entire life. Emily, his voice cracked painfully. Nova collapsed beside him at the exact moment another burst of gunfire exploded outside. Then Ryan Mercer's voice echoed through the compound one final time. Run! The explosion that followed shook the entire facility. And deep inside her heart, Emily already knew Ryan was never coming back. Spring arrived slowly in Montana, melting the last layers of snow from the mountains while rivers of cold water rushed through Black Hollow Forest like the wilderness itself was finally waking from a long nightmare. Emily Carter stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt shelter and watched the sunrise spill gold across the valley below. For the first time in years, the silence around her no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, The old Raven Creek Animal Shelter had burned during the FBI raid weeks earlier after one of Victor Krause's men tried destroying evidence. What remained now stood 2 miles farther west on a larger piece of land donated anonymously by a Veterans Foundation after the story reached national news. A wooden sign hung beside the gravel driveway. Raven House. Beneath it sat a smaller line carved carefully by hand. For the forgotten ones who still deserve a way home. Emily touched the sign gently as wind moved through her loose brown hair. Her face still carried exhaustion, but something softer had returned to her eyes now. Hope had not erased the grief inside her. It had simply learned to live beside it. The FBI investigation shattered Victor Krause's trafficking network across 3 states and parts of Canada. More than 40 military dogs were recovered alive from hidden compounds. Several corrupt contractors and former soldiers disappeared before arrests could be made, but the operation itself was destroyed. Ryan Mercer never left the mountains. They found his body inside the burning warehouse, surrounded by open cages. He had died setting the dogs free. Emily still thought about him almost every night. Daniel Carter survived, though survival looked very different than it once had. 3 years of imprisonment had left permanent damage behind. His left hand shook slightly now from nerve injuries, and scars crossed his ribs and shoulders where restraints had torn into skin over time. The strong, confident soldier Emily once knew had become quieter, more cautious, sometimes startled by sounds that shouldn't frighten anyone. Especially fireworks. Especially helicopters. Especially silence. Some nights, Emily woke to find him sitting awake beside the window at 3 in the morning with Nova lying protectively at his feet. Neither of them slept much anymore. Trauma recognized itself. But healing had started. Slowly. Painfully. Honestly. Daniel stepped onto the porch beside her carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He looked healthier than before, though still thinner than the man who had left for Syria years ago. His dark hair was shorter now, streaked slightly with gray near the temples, and the beard he kept trimmed could not fully hide the scars across his jawline. Yet when he smiled at Emily, she still saw glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with at 22. "You've been out here since sunrise," he said quietly. Emily accepted the coffee. Couldn't sleep. Daniel nodded knowingly. Neither of them asked questions anymore when nightmares stole rest away. Nova emerged from inside the shelter moments later, followed closely by 4 nearly grown German shepherd puppies tumbling clumsily behind her. The puppies had inherited her intelligence and alertness, but none of her sadness. Their oversized paws slapped against the porch while they chased each other in circles through the morning light. Nova herself moved slower now. The gunshot wound in her shoulder healed, but not perfectly. She limped slightly during cold mornings, though she never complained. At 6 years old, the shepherd carried herself with calm dignity, her amber eyes constantly tracking Daniel no matter where he went. She still guarded him. Always. A truck pulled into the driveway around noon carrying Dr. Hannah Pierce, the veterinarian assigned to monitor the rescued military dogs. Hannah was a woman in her early 40s with dark curly hair, usually tied beneath a baseball cap, and sharp brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She spoke with direct confidence that came from years working emergency animal rescue during natural disasters across the country. "You've got 3 new arrivals," she announced while climbing out of the truck. Inside the trailer waited 2 injured Belgian Malinois rescued from another trafficking site, and an older Labrador with severe anxiety around loud noises. The trembling Labrador immediately pressed itself against the back corner of the cage, terrified. Daniel crouched slowly outside the trailer. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered gently. The dog stared at him cautiously. Then Nova stepped beside Daniel. Something shifted instantly. Animals trusted Nova in ways humans naturally trusted sunlight. The Labrador slowly approached the cage door. Emily watched quietly from the porch while emotion tightened painfully inside her chest. Months ago, she had been drowning in grief inside a collapsing shelter surrounded by ghosts. Now wounded dogs from across the country were arriving here to heal, just like them. Later that evening, Emily walked alone toward the hill behind Raven House, where a simple wooden cross overlooked the valley. Ryan Mercer's grave. Fresh wildflowers rested there beneath the wind. "You were right," Emily whispered softly into the fading sunlight. She found her way home. Below the hill, laughter echoed from the shelter yard as Daniel tried teaching the puppies basic commands while Nova supervised like an exhausted mother pretending not to care. Emily smiled through tears. For years, she believed survival meant avoiding pain. But she finally understood something different now. Sometimes surviving meant allowing yourself to love again, even after the world gave you every reason not to. And sometimes hope returned on 4 tired legs through the middle of a snowstorm. Sometimes, God does not send miracles the way we expect. They do not always arrive as flashing lights or voices from heaven. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, wounded and exhausted, carrying hope through the middle of a storm. A lonely woman believed she had lost the love of her life forever. A broken soldier believed the world had forgotten him. And a faithful dog refused to stop searching for home. Maybe that is how God works in our lives too. Through the people who stay when everyone else walks away. Through the strangers who help us when we are falling apart. Through loyal hearts that remind us we are still worth saving, even in our darkest moments. In everyday life, many people silently carry pain nobody else can see. Some are fighting grief. Some are fighting loneliness. Some are simply trying to survive another difficult day while pretending they are okay. That is why kindness matters. A phone call matters. Checking on someone matters. Showing up for the people you love matters more than you realize. And maybe today, God is using you to become somebody else's miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope tonight. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and what part of the story moved you the most. And if you enjoy emotional stories about faith, loyalty, courage, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. May God bless you, protect your family, heal every hidden wound in your heart, and guide your steps through every storm life places before you. And may you never forget, even in the darkest night, hope can still find its way home.